Hey, listeners, welcome back to the Better Divorce podcast. If you don't know who I am, my name is Paulette Rigo. I am the CEO and founder of Better Divorce Academy and the author of #1 best-selling book, workbook, audiobook, and now online course, Better Divorce Blueprint. And yes, the host of the Better Divorce podcast. I went to London last year and studied with Dr. Ramani because I work a lot with high conflict cases, both in mediation and in coaching clients who go through that unfortunate experience of litigation. And I was fortunate enough to have applied to Dr. Ramani training program for clinicians and coaches in London and was accepted. There was a very small group of us, I think about 38, and we trained for 3 days in coercive control and a lot of her work. And where I was introduced to Christina Cocciola and her book Framed. Long story. If you want to cry, get the book and get a box of tissues. But not that I want to be a drama queen, but I'm all about education. This is the reason I started this podcast when it was originally 9 years ago called Thriving in Chaos with my radio partner, Elizabeth Stanley. Hello, Elizabeth, if you're listening. And then when I moved to Belize, I couldn't, have a radio show. It needed to be a podcast, right? So I kept the name. And then when I moved back to the States, I renamed it the Better Divorce Podcast. I find this tool, this passion project, a way for me to educate people in all aspects of divorce. So you just need to find a topic that appeals to you and what's going on in your situation. You don't need to listen to the ones that don't pertain to you. But this is a very important topic. And I see that it's shifting. In London, it's in England, in the UK, coercive control is a thing. Like the court system has woken up to that. The United States is a little bit further behind with having that term be kind of jargon in the court system. And I'm all about avoiding court. And hopefully you guys have all learned from me that 97% of cases do not go to trial. Only 3% do, but those are typically the ones that have to because they have a partner that is a PIA. That's my term. That is not a legal acronym. Pain in you know what. So they have a feeling of lack of empathy, entitlement, and exploitation. It all boils down to control. And if you don't know how to untangle yourself from that knotted ball of yarn, if you can envision that ball of yarn like a cat would play with, it's only going to get more tangled. So my job as a mediator and a trained coach in this world is to untangle the knot. So you just have one string and we can cut it in half. But if you can't get your spouse to agree to that, you now have to beg the court to decide for you, and hence the domino effect of litigation. So whether you're mediating or coaching through litigation or litigating and need a coach through litigation, this conversation may help you learn more about that. So we're going to talk about coercive control, and today's expert is amazing. So get your darn notebook and paper, pen, pencil, crayon, mascara, eyeliner, whatever the heck you have to write with, and take a note. So my guest today, her name is Sybil Cummin. No, Cummin. See, I said it wrong. My guest today is Sybil Cummin. She's a licensed professional counselor who has specialized in working with victims and survivors of coercive control and domestic violence, which I've also learned is now kind of coined intimate partner violence. So whether it's DV or IPV, it doesn't matter. It just means that your spouse is not a nice person and it's very difficult to divorce them. They typically see divorce as psychological warfare. And her work for the last decade, including children of the child victims for their families. So there's not just the families as in spouses, but you have children involved. And this is where it typically can become more complicated. Now, she owns a small practice, a therapy practice in Colorado, and offers witnessing and let me do that again. She owns a small group therapy practice in Colorado, and after witnessing the constant ethical issues survivors experience in the family court system, trying to protect their children, she created Rising Beyond Power and Control, often referred to as the Rising Beyond community, to help close the gap in support for this population. So I welcome you, Sybil. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, it's a topic I talk about a little bit because people hear my story of having gone through a highly contested, long case. 8.5 years is typically, I hate this word, unprecedented, and 12-day trial. But what was most unique about it is the 4-year Supreme Appellate Court process.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say Supreme Court, I don't mean the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean state appellate Supreme Court. So people don't, it's just a term that is used for the court. So don't get that all, like, I'm not trying to impress people with the Supreme word. So
Yeah.
it's just that there's the court system and it's graded, right? So family court is differently than criminal court. Family court only deals with divorce and custody and adoption. And then if anything is appealed in any realm of the court system in the lower courts, it then jumps up to the higher court and then ultimately the highest level, or the Supreme Appeal Court. So yeah, it went all that way for 4 years, and it's so unique and so rare, but it taught me everything I didn't want to know about the court system. So why do you do this work? Tell us your story. How did you end up here? Were you that kid that woke up and said, I want to help children of domestic violence partners? Like, I know she's
Nope.
nodding her head if you're listening to the audio, right? Like, no. So how did you get to this journey, and what made you want to help people?
Yeah, so I am a play therapist by training. So I've learned to work with children, usually young children. So like 12 and under was sort of my bread and butter. And I've worked with kids my entire life. So I just assumed I'd work with kids and teens. And I knew I'd work with divorce, like at some point, right? That's just comes with the territory. But there was this other monster that kept showing up in my work. And I unfortunately was not trained in my graduate program on how to even assess for intimate partner violence, domestic violence, coercive control. Like, we were not taught to assess for that, even in a couples and family program. And so I couldn't totally put my finger on what was going on for these kids and these families. And so fast forward in my practice, when I started working more specifically with children who have experienced divorce or who are stuck in divorce, and really got to see all the dynamics of both parents, the family system, and how that showed up specifically in the family court system. And so I could give recommendations left and right to parents. And there was typically a parent who wanted to really support the child. And there was typically another parent who either didn't want the child to see me at all, or that wanted to use me for court. They did not actually have a whole lot of care about what their child was experiencing. It was more about optics. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of noticed these things.
That expert to testify.
Yep. And I am a unicorn. If it's in the best interest of my kiddo clients, I do testify in family court for them on behalf of them. That's a fairly small number, because most of the time is not in your child's best interest to have their therapist testify in court. It completely harms that relationship that I have with my kids. And if it's safety, even if it's psychological safety, because if it's physical safety, I'm a mandated reporter, so I'm calling Child Protective Services. And so I would go to court and share concerns and share what was going on. and the court outcomes that the judges were making were not in the child's best interest.
Mm.
Very consistently not in the child's best interest.
And why
And
do you think
so,
that is?
so many reasons. I think it depends on what day you catch me and how jaded I'm feeling in that moment. So sometimes I believe it is due to financial benefit of the family court system. So if we keep these
Break that down.
families,
That's everyone hear that. So I really love you to break that down, Sybil. That's
yes,
quite the quote. Go for it.
yes. So these quote unquote, you don't see I'm doing air quotes, high conflict families where they are kind of stuck in family court for years. That is where the majority of money comes from for court professionals that are in litigation. So that is the
And
guardian
when you
ad
say court
litems,
professionals, do you mean the attorneys representing them or other
attorneys, guardian ad litems, the evaluators, anyone that's kind of involved in litigation. This is where their money comes from. And so
yeah,
it actually benefits
to keep the
that
case going?
profession to keep it going.
Yeah.
And to keep it going, keep it going. So on a jaded day, that is my answer. On a less jaded day, which is also true, is because the courts and those in it do not understand the impacts of coercive control on children.
I agree with you.
And there's research that they could read because we've had research for a long time about how harmful coercive control is on children. And yet decisions are still being made that are not in the best interest of children and maintain the litigation for years and years and years and years.
So for those people that have heard domestic violence, I would say 95% of people have heard about that term, right? I mean, it's sort of a common term. The intimate partner violence, 50%, 40%, who cares? It's just another terminology.
Just another term for it.
Maybe not you're not in a domestic relationship. You may not be married, right? So, and don't forget family court you don't always have to be married. Once you have a child, in the eyes of the court, you're kind of married, people. So, when people call me and say, oh, we're not married, but we have 3 kids, I go, oh, that's nice. I mean, no judgment morally. I mean, well, that's a whole nother conversation. I'm not going down that road today. But but the court's concern is what is in the best interest of the children, right? And if you've had a child with someone, you now are required to have an agreement. So what is going to happen with legal custody, decision making? What is going to happen with where they sleep? Physical custody, and who's paying for what, child support is essential. So now we go into this third terminology that's getting more press of coercive control. So can you please define coercive control? And then how does it differ from the other two?
Yeah, so I think coercive control, the easiest way to understand it is what is underneath any form of abuse. So it is kind of a way to hold power and control over someone else. And these are the tactics of coercive control that are being used. So it might be financial, it might be emotional, it might be psychological, it might be physical, it might be the threat of physical violence, but there needs to be coercive control for there to be these other forms of abuse. Another term people like to use, the cool kids term, is narcissistic abuse. I don't actually care what term you use. I'm going to meet you where you're at because there's so many myths about what is domestic violence. And I think that the language of violence makes people think that it is physical harm.
Right.
But actually that is not kind of underneath that's a piece of what it is,
Sure.
But that's not actually required for there to be domestic violence. Now, if we're looking at criminal cases, typically there needs to be some form of physical violence or physical threat for it to be there. But coercive control is basically And I think, and I see from more this therapeutic standpoint, the goal of coercive control is to remove your freedom, your autonomy, and your sense of self. And so
Mm,
that is the outcome of coercive control, whether you have physical violence or not physical violence, sexual violence or not sexual violence. The goal is to, in whatever way possible, is for the kind of abusive person to strip those things away from you, because then they have full control over you and your kids as well.
mm. Well, I define this in my book, Better Divorce Blueprint, the 7 types of abuse, right? Let's just call
Mm-hmm.
it abuse. Um, and it takes many forms. I say there are 7, maybe there are more, but from the work that I've done, I've pretty much taken every tool, tactic, habit, behavior, and put it into a bucket, and then categorize them into these 7. So for a quick review, if you're taking notes, you have the 3 more emotional ones: psychological, mental, emotional. Those are sort of the what you say, what you feel, and what you think, and how you identify as a person, right? Psychological, mental, and emotional. Those are ones that are very hard to grasp and define and
Mm-hmm.
understand and collate and organize and describe, because they're fleeting and they're inconsistent and they're hard to track. And sometimes you feel, due to the tactic or habit or behavior, that you're being a drama king or queen, or you're part of the problem, or whatever it is. But so that's sort of the clump of those 3. And then, as you said, Sybil, the 2 that get the press because they also go into the world of criminal court, or can, of
Mm-hmm.
physical and sexual abuse, right? So if
Yep.
you have a black eye, or a clump of hair missing, or a broken jaw, a missing tooth, a broken bone, or you've been sexually abused or raped, right? Those 2 are a lot easier to see with the naked eye. So therefore, they're more believable. They're more credible, right? Not
Yep.
necessarily that the others are less harmful, but they're like, when you take a picture of somebody who's been emotionally abused, they may still wear lipstick and do their hair and look great, but when you see a picture of somebody who's been physically or sexually abused, they're typically not so clean slated looking.
Yeah.
And then you get into the 2 that are a little bit, you know, well, one is very difficult to detect, and one is not so much: the financial abuse, right? As you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't have access to marital funds, you're not allowed to see the tax returns, you're designated to a certain amount of money, or you cannot work, or you have to work, or whatever the financial tactic is. There's this financial constraint that you live under. When I ask people, do you have full knowledge of all your marital assets and debt? Most people say no, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a problem. So let's fix
Yes.
that, everyone. And then lastly is spiritual abuse. And this is the one that I say is where I use the example of when you get a puppy and you're trying to housebreak it, right? So it doesn't keep piddling all over the house and ruin your rugs and your hardwood floors and your tile and just, smell like death, right? When you get a puppy, you have to housebreak it. And not that we're trying to harm the dog, but we want to break it of the habit. So we have to kind of teach it who's boss, and, teach it, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
no, we do that here, we don't do that there. And we're in some ways trying to break the spirit of the dog, so that it learns, obviously, no, right from wrong. And eventually it stops doing it, and you build it back up again and it knows what not to do. But there's that sense of housebreaking, right? We use the word break because we're trying to break the dog of this habit. So spiritual abuse is much like that, where your spirit is being broken, right? Your sense of self, your sense of identification, self-respect, and knowing, your inner knowingness of what makes you tick and who you are, gets destroyed. So spiritual abuse, if you go into court and say, I've been spiritually abused, they're going to think you're insane. So Don't do that, everyone. This is
Yep.
just, I'm teaching, because if you can say, yes, that so many people go, that's exactly how I feel. Like I feel like somebody's trying to break me, right? Like harm.
Yeah.
It's the most coercive of them all, right? The most
Yeah.
negative, gray, dark area, swept under the rug, kept in the closet. Because, the financial one you can track. You either look at the tax returns or you don't. Broken bones, well, that's a no-brainer. And even the psychological, mental, and you've got video and audio and emails and text messages of nasty messages, and all that. There are ways of tracking it and codifying it, but when it comes to that very subtle, like evil, manipulative game playing, right? That can really wreak havoc over years of that. It's devastating to people. So, I think it's very important that people have that clear idea, right?
Yeah.
So I hope that helps everyone, right?
Yeah.
So
And I
let's talk
think
about
that,
the impact
mhm,
here. Like, what is this impact of coercive control and domestic violence on divorce and ultimately on children? Because not everybody has children.
right.
I think it's something
Yep.
like 55 or 60% of divorcing couples have children. So not everyone who's divorcing has children, and not everyone who's divorcing has coercive control. So, some people who are divorcing have coercive control and no children, and some have both, which is a double whammy. I'm sorry, I love you, big hug. So break that down. So how does coercive control affect, the divorce overall? And then how does it affect it even deeper if there are minor children?
Yeah. So the kind of belief, the myth that is out there that once you leave, once you escape, is that you are safe.
Mm,
And actually, just because you've left does not mean that your partner, your ex partner, their desire and goal to have power and control over you has gone. In fact, it actually increases in intensity for them because you broke out of their power and control. And so while they may not have the same type of access to you, they will have access to you through your children, through the court system, through any joint people at family and friends. This is where their access is, through finances pretty significantly. And so even though you have separated, the abuse will continue, just will look different. And in fact, some women that I've worked with, if there wasn't physical abuse or significant abuse that they can't put their finger on during the relationship, and so they think, oh my gosh, this is going to be just fine. We're going to separate. It'll be all good. We're going to come to agreements. And then bam, the abuse intensifies pretty significantly. And so you are so off balance, so overwhelmed with that, com- combined with the belief that the family court system is going to help you.
mm. And
And
let's talk
that
a little bit
is
about that
really
family court.
frustrating
Yeah, no, it is. You
because it's not there to help you. Um, and, when you've left the relationship, very often you are off balance anyways and overwhelmed and trying to understand your experience. And so you show up in ways, and I say this with love all the time, like a crazy person. And so when you're talking with professionals or even family and friends, you're kind of sharing context of the story of what's happened, and you're trying to get them to understand, and they're not able to connect the dots. And so they're seeing these smaller, maybe incidents that you're talking about, and they're not able to see the long-term pattern. And the courts aren't able to see the long-term pattern either. They get you for a snapshot most of the time. And so you are left really confused, unable to kind of get your needs met, your voice heard, because of how the trauma of coercive control shows up for you, because it is traumatic, like that stripping away of your identity and autonomy can create different trauma symptoms. If it's extreme, then it will create PTSD symptoms. Something we talk about all the time in Rising Beyond is the moral injury that will show up when you have to make decisions that go against your moral compass. And maybe you have two decisions and both decisions are horrible. And so you are stuck in that space of making a decision that goes against who you are as a human and as your morals. And so that significantly impacts your healing. So then when we bring kids into the mix, they are also now, because they don't have direct access to you, you don't live in the home with them, your kids are now the number one tool that they can use. And if they were coercive to you, they will be coercive to your children.
Yes.
So in not just my belief system, but everything I have read, all the research I have read, someone who uses coercion against the parent of their children will also use it against their child. It is the way they will parent. It is the way they work in their world. So it is choice a lot of times, but it's just the way they've learned to work in their world. So now they will use your children against you. They will either counter parent, which is, if you had this agreed upon way of raising your kids, maybe you agreed that they're vegetarian. And then all of a sudden you separate and they are giving your kids meat at their home. That is counter parenting. Or you are like, no, we are a screen-free family. And then all of a sudden screens are available all the time. So those are, not less harmful, but just different elements of doing that. They may talk poorly about you. They may take on that victim role, that victim stance, so that their kids take kind of an emotional care of that parent. That is coercive control as well. They will use shame. They will use all the tactics they used on you, and gaslighting and minimizing and all of those things they use on you, they will use on your child as well. And so now you've left and you are no longer the buffer to keep your kids safe. So you took the brunt of the abuse before, and you no longer live in the same home, and they are going to go back and forth to the other home. And that's probably a whole nother episode on that, on why that is. But they'll go back and forth to the other home, and you can't, in those moments, keep them safe.
You can't babysit them. Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do to, in your own power, to force your ex-partner to follow a court order.
Nope.
It's outside of your control. So if the court order says you will not disparage the other parent, there is nothing in your control to make them follow that order. It's just not doable.
Yeah,
and you can even
think there's going to be little private investigators embedded in the wallpaper that when they say, well, it's, you tell your mother or you tell your father, they're like, oh, here come the
look what happened.
Yeah.
And so these poor kiddos are stuck in this at one home. But the positive is, because I love to share, there is hope. There is always hope that they come to your home. And the way you parent your children, the way you show up for your children, can help combat the coercive control they will experience at the other home. So you do have some control over the okayness of your kids.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a matter of saying, in house, and there are 4 levels of parenting: co-parenting, parallel parenting, and counter-parenting. So naturally, parenting is when you bring the baby home from the hospital and neither of you know what the heck you're doing and you're trying your best to do it together. And then in divorce, you try to do the same thing, but you're in 2 separate households, hence the term co-parenting. And then parallel parenting is when, maybe bedtime is 7:30 at one house and the other's 8:30 at the other, but no kid died or was harmed from an hour difference. But in the counter parenting, the bedtime is whatever time it is, and then the second house there is no bedtime, or or it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like the
Yeah.
opposite. It's just you tell me what your rules are, and then I'm going to make my own the exact opposite. And I'm not even going to have the decency to tell you what my rules are. They're just going to basically be everything you don't want, just to kind of, irritate you and harm the children.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the court system. If you said, and I can't remember the exact quote you used about that the courts, that isn't the court's role. So what, in your, as a mental health practitioner and an expert in this, what is the role of the court system?
In theory, in theory, the court system is set up to make decisions when parents cannot about what is in the best interest of the children. And there's the financial aspect of division of assets, which I do less of that. It impacts my work because protective parents who are financially decimated, they have a lot harder time finding resources for their kids, finding therapists for their kids, even just basic needs for their kids. So it does impact what I do. But in theory, a family court's job is to make decisions about what is in a child's best interest.
And then the question now is, what the heck is the best interest? And I have this in my book too about, the studies and where that came from and that terminology and how that all happened. But it's subjective, right, Sybil? I mean, what one
Mhm.
person's definition or idea of best interest will be or can be quite different from
Yeah.
another judge or another person's
Mhm.
opinion, because it's subjective. I mean, that here you are now asking not the court system, but a person who is named a judge, and their job description is built into the name of their job. Judge. They judge people.
Yep.
And people are like, why are they so judgmental? Well, that's an interesting question. It's built into their job, right? And not judge. I mean, we can judge good or bad, right? That's, again, subjective. So they're going to look at the parties and say who is more believable, who is
Mhm.
more credible, and in some cases, who is more likable.
Yes.
So that's not always
Yes.
appropriate, and I'm going to leave that at that. But, demeanor has everything to do with it. The
Yes.
way you speak to the court, your respect for the court, the decorum and the formality of the court system is very important. I mean, I go quite often, I see people saunter in their jammies with their little Crocs on and, tank tops with, baseball caps and crinkly water bottles and, reeking of things I don't want to discuss because I
Oh, I live in
do
Colorado.
too much. So yeah. And I'm going like, WT something. That is not, that is not how you dress or act or speak or behave. And even some attorneys now are a little too disheveled, in my opinion. Not that I think you need to look like you just rolled out of some, fashion magazine, but you should at least be clean and tidy and, at least wear a simple dress or a simple shirt and trousers and a jacket or a sweater or something, appropriate for a formal legal proceeding. And the judge is naturally going to look at you and say, well, it would have, and showing up on time. I digress. I apologize. But they're going to look at you and say, this apparently is not important to you. It's not a priority, right? And if
Yeah.
if your family and your children and your future is not a priority, then, well, maybe that's something to take into consideration. Now, with this unfortunate situation of the using these tactics to not only use them to control their spouse, but to continue that behavior into the continuing to affect the children. What is the result of that? Is it, as a therapist,
Yep.
it has an impact. Now, some children are very resilient. Um,
Mhm.
not all children, fall apart. Some of them rise above it. They become stronger, more motivated. It builds character. It builds integrity. All character, right? And others, melt like ice cream. and need to be, hugged and loved. Not that they don't all deserve love, but extra care, right? There's that, gradient of how children are affected by this type of coercive control. As an expert, what is the result that you see? What are the behaviors or results of this that you see the most common?
Yeah, it can go a couple different ways, and it depends right on the age of the child,
Yes.
their natural kind of tendencies or personality style of the child. But it can go right. So if they are more in the trauma of it, they're more in their fight or flight. You might see the big behaviors, the big acting out. They go to the protective parents' home and they are then a hot mess, and they're throwing things and hitting and mimicking the abuser a lot of times in the home. They're having those huge behaviors. Those are more the behaviors that bring people to therapy because they're happening at school. They're happening, but typically often they are only happening at the protective parent's home because it is safer at the protective parent's home. They are holding their stuff together because it is less safe at the abuser's home to act a fool, act a hot mess, right?
Yeah,
To
as we
have
said,
any
they
emotion.
feel like they can let their hair down,
And
right?
so they go to the protective parent's home and they feel safer and they just
Right.
let it all out. So then there's a group of kiddos who internalize these things more. So those are the kids that are ignored more. So they may go into either that freeze response, which is more of the depressed look, or what we see very often because it works really well is the fawning response, which is a people pleasing or placating response. So these are the kids that are going to really align with the other parent in a way just to keep them safe. And
Hmm.
so they may
Be
um,
more agreeable and kind of
very
hiding that,
agreeable,
whatever you
getting good
say, and I
grades,
got you, and I believe
being,
you, and you're right,
yes,
and yeah.
yes, and being quieter and being the good child. Usually that's the golden child. But they are very often, they have really significant impacts long term as well. And so we are like, oh God, but they're doing good in school, so we're good. But actually, those kiddos often need more care longer term because they are constantly in a state where they cannot kind of let their guard down.
Hmm.
Whereas the kiddos who are acting out crazy at your home, they're at least expressing things at one home. And so they're
Hmm.
getting their needs met, and we're noticing, and we're trying to help build their resourcing, and we're trying to help them be grounded. And so there's these kind of forgotten ones. I see have a lot of long-term impacts. And then if the coercive control is extreme, and the child's getting older, so that tweens and teens, then there is, and I don't use the term alienation because that's a whole nother topic, but it is used as a legal um, tactic for an abusive person to get full decision making, full custody of children. So I don't use that term. And
Which
there
term do
is
you use
that.
then? If it isn't alienation, is it estrangement or
So it
withdrawal or
is,
rejection, or what do you use?
it's so hard because I typically try to, and I teach the mamas I'm working with to use observable behaviors. What are they observing? Because guess what? That is rebranded all the time. So alienation is then rebranded as enmeshment and then is rebranded as other things. A lot of people like CAMS, which I do and don't like. It's child and mother sabotage. Um, I right, there's not a great term for it, and it is basically when they completely turn your child against you. Their goal is to break any and all
Mhm.
attachment
Yeah.
that you have with your child.
Right.
So
So I
those are
guess
the
we
more
don't need a term
extreme.
for it. It is what it is, right?
Yep, they are, the goal is to decimate the relationship you have with your child.
Right. Rejection.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's also to form an alliance against them too. It's
Hmm.
like this this wall or this alliance of needing additional people on their side to see, therefore I won because more people have taken my side than your side. And
Yeah.
for them, because divorce is a psychological warfare, it's all about winning. And how do you know you've won in war? Well, you've got more people on your side and the other side surrenders and you say we've
Yep.
won, right? So
And
it can be a game. And you made a point, and I agree with that, that a lot of it has to do with the personality of the child in the first place,
yeah.
having nothing to do with the divorce, the demeanor and the DNA and the makeup of that child, but also their age, right? And their birth
Yes.
order, right? And how
Yep.
they're able to cope with being resilient and discerning reality, and also being able to make decisions for themselves. That's a developmental issue. Some kids can make really smart decisions for themselves at a young age, and well, let's say there's some 45-year-olds out that still can't. So what the one thing I see is also just acting out, whether it be
Hmm. Yeah.
they're either very recluse and it's pot smoking, video games, staying in their room, not talking, wearing their hair in front of their face, not taking care of themselves, hygiene issues, eating, the same thing, eating in their room, not wanting to deal with reality and society and just being fitting in and kind of moving through the stages of development, or they're cutting and drinking and partying and being sexually promiscuous and swearing and driving fast and slamming doors and giving you the finger and
Hmm.
cursing, like the stories I hear, well, they're doing this and they're doing that, and part of me goes, well, welcome to raising teenagers, then
Right.
that
Right. And there's that
we
balance
have five
too.
amongst the two of us. So we get it. I mean, I was a teenager once. I was a total pain in the ass too. Why would anybody else be different? So, but at what point do you take responsibility and ownership for your own life? So it's very hard to help someone understand what part of the dysfunctional behavior is just quote unquote being an adolescent, right?
Yeah.
Talking back and being rebellious and defiant, and I want an Oompa Loompa now, I call it, just Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, if you know what I'm talking about. If not,
Hmm.
watch it. Veruca is a terrible child. But anyway, or the child that's overly responsible, right? Sybil, that
Hmm.
straight A's, never does the wrong thing, never talks back, always there, I mean, that I was that child that always, didn't want to make waves and kept the family together, and just did what I was told, and allowed everyone to
Yeah.
make my decisions for me, and just always was, did the right thing, said the right thing, although behind closed doors, it was a little like, really, but that's teenagerhood, but when you get into divorce, it gets very difficult when
Yeah.
the parents are playing tug of war and the children are in the middle saying stop,
Hmm.
you know
Yep.
and once you're in the judicial system, you don't have the ability and the autonomy to say stop. You're at the mercy of the court system, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
now, how can a protective parent best parent their children? That's, and I don't know if protective is the way I think all parents are protective, but there's protective functioning healthy and not functioning healthy. But we talked about this resilience,
Hmm.
children do need to learn patience, persistence, and perseverance. Those are my three key words, right? But how do you teach a parent how to teach your children to be more resilient? Because when they're in this, it's hard. The parent is falling apart, and now they have to step up to the plate and
Yep.
accept that their spouse is who they are and they're not going to change. That's another conversation. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it's yellow like a duck, it's a duck. But now they have to breed their own acceptance of, this is who I'm married to and this is who I'm divorcing. But now picking yourself up and also picking the children up to be the light and be that resilient character of courage and strength. What tips do you give parents to do that
Yeah.
when they're basically an amoeba melting in the corner of the room?
Yep. So one, you do need to take care of yourself so you can take care of your kids. Getting mental health support, finding a support group or community, things like that. And when you're parenting, this is beneficial for uh, litigation, but it's also beneficial for your kids, is you are going to show up in the ways that your ex-partner is unable to show up. So you are going to basically show the contrast, and not even show the contrast. You are going to show up in ways so that your kids feel the difference, internally feel their nervous system is going to feel the difference between your home and your ex-partner's home. So this includes, right, you can unconditionally love somebody. Your partner cannot. They do not. If they are using coercive control, they actually do not have the capability to love unconditionally. The love will always have strings attached. So if you are showing up with unconditional love, where they can fail, they can be naughty, they can do the things, and they know you love them. They don't have to be the star football player on the team. They don't have to get straight A's. They can decide to get their hair green, and you still love them the same, because that's not going to happen at the other home. You're going to allow them to have autonomy over what they can have autonomy. Clearly, that is age specific, but giving them the choice to make decisions about how they dress, what they look like, what music they like. Those things are really important. Do they want to play an instrument? Do they want to do an athletic? Those things are also not going to be allowed at the other home very often, because the child is an extension of the other parent. So if that parent was a football player in high school, believe me, your child better be a football player or a cheerleader, right? To gain their love. So you're going to show up that way. You're going to allow critical thinking. Imagine that. They don't have to agree with you. And it's okay if they don't agree with you, because that's not okay at the other home, right? You're going to actually allow them, and this is hard, to talk about and love their other parent. That is not allowed at the other home.
Yes.
And so you are going to allow them to be humans and to give them all the developmental things they need to be a human that will do well in this world, because kids who are not allowed to make decisions do not feel capable. Kids that don't have that unconditional love don't feel deserving, right? The only way they are deserving is if they get straight A's, or if they're pretty, or if they're thin enough, or if whatever it is, they have to perform to get love. So for the parent, protective parent, the best thing you can do is show up in those ways, which is probably how you want to show up as a parent anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I see that the children that do the best are with naturally coupled. When I'm mediating, they drive in together and they sit in my conference room, and they're cordial, and they leave together. And there are a few times, I just did one last week, when I said, "Are you sure you two want to get divorced?" No judgment. If you do, you do. Like, I'm not here to save your marriage or tell you to get divorced. But as a professional who does this every day, I see couples. On a litmus test of conflict, you're like at a -5. And it's very interesting to see the kind of reaction. So now there are others that cannot be in the same room together.
Yep.
One has to come at 8 o'clock. The other comes at 9. I sneak them in the back way. They're in a separate office. They're in another office. They're caucusing or separately. They can never actually have any interaction. I always have to be the ombudsman, which is fine. That's my responsibility. So it isn't like private mediation isn't always amicable or not.
Yeah.
It's a gradient of all different aspects. But overall, the ones who have children that do the best are the ones who see their children as individuals, not as an extension of themselves, living vicariously through them, that has to fulfill their dreams and hopes and wishes of what they see them doing. I always wanted to make sure that my children became their own idealized self, and didn't feel like they had to fall into the footsteps of either myself or their dad. And so far, so good. They have all done that. So I feel that, it wasn't easy, making sure that, because I grew up in a family where I had to be a ballerina, and my
Hmm.
ex-husband grew up in a family where he had to be involved in the family business. And I was like, oh, we're both really bad examples. I don't know that I ever said that to him, but, and just no judgment of like, ooh, of like
Yeah.
autonomizing
Yep.
children, but it was a something like, I really want to make sure that none of them feel this obligation, this obligatory need to have to fulfill my, or, parent A or B's wishes, hopes, and dreams for our children. And
Yeah.
knock on wood, they're all in their almost 30s. Well, 28, 31, 33. So far, so good, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's always interesting to see that sea of identification of children who have been through divorce, and how it
Hmm.
has affected them in their own relationships and in their careers, and making them more courageous and resilient children. And just to tie this up, one of my favorite divorce children's stories is we had the children at the beach, and we had a little rental there, and I think the littlest was 1 and the other 2 are 3 and 5. And I was at the beach, and there was this great I don't know, she was probably 14 at the time. Her name was Sarah, and we hit it off, and they were playing, and I was like, Sarah, do you babysit? And she said, I do, I love to. She was the oldest of, I don't know, 7 kids or something. And so she immediately started babysitting, and we fell in love with her, and she fell in love with the kids, and she babysat for probably 5 or 6 years, as the children. And she's
Hmm.
now married and has 3 kids of her own. Interesting. But I tell you this story. If you're listening, Sarah, I owe you so much, helping me keep it together with those little kids while we were going through difficult years. But I didn't know it, but her parents were divorced, and you would never know it. Her mom and dad treated each other with respect. They did not live together, but you wouldn't even know it. And whether they were, with dad or with mom, and they were together, all 7 of the kids, or I think 7, maybe 6, but it was a lot. I was like, wait. She goes, oh, I said, where do you want me to bring you? And she goes, oh, to my mom's, or oh, to my dad's. And I was like, I almost wanted to like bite my tongue. And I went, excuse me? Wait, your parents don't live together? She goes, oh no, they're divorced. And I went, excuse me? I mean, it was probably months before I knew that, right? And
Hmm.
not that people walk around and go, oh, my parents are divorced, or they're, but and I was like, Sarah, your family is the poster child family of how people can do this. um not everyone can, but it is possible. And it's one of the reasons I founded Better Divorce Academy and do the work I do. I know it can be better. It doesn't have to be horrible. I see it every day. I do this work for that exact reason. So I'm so glad we had this conversation, and kudos to you for starting this group and the work you do, and being willing to walk this walk with families. It's not easy work. It takes a lot
No.
out of you, and being able to be that light and that beacon of hope for them is vital to the success. And also being an impetus of force to be reckoned with in the court system, where you're encouraging families and attorneys and the judicial system to really look at the big picture, and not just the
Yes.
small
Not
little.
just the snapshot. We
Yes,
need to look at patterns, and there needs to be more of us who haven't experienced abuse, that haven't been through that, speaking about it and
right,
advocating and doing the legislative work,
right.
because survivors are tired. They're
Yes, yes.
exhausted. And so, yeah, there just needs
And
to be more of
in
us.
many ways, so are the abusers. It's exhausting to be so combative and difficult. And, everybody's just looking for, I don't know, their own way. And the court really does have an, an, I don't want to say an oath to to really listen and look at the big picture, ultimately for the betterment of the children. Because if you can't go to the kids' high school graduation together, and so on and so forth, it's going to leave a legacy for them. So in no short terms, thank you. I appreciate it. So what is the best way to people to go deeper and learn more about your work and potentially find out more about your group?
Yeah. So, probably the best way to hear all of the things is to take a listen to the Rising Beyond podcast. I talk about all things, parenting when you're dealing with a high conflict co parent, legal pieces of it, how to communicate, and also how to heal yourself so that you can do all these things.
Big one.
And so that's just, you can search it on, it's on every platform, the Rising Beyond community. But more information about the community that I run and the workshops is on my website, which is risingbeyondpc.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Sybil, and I hope everyone has gained some knowledge, just a little glimmer of hope that there are experts out there that can help you get clear and educated on what it is. If it's something you're dealing with, if it isn't, congratulations. If it
Yeah.
is, don't give up. Be the light. Rise above it. You got this. Get the help you need. Be prepared. Get your ducks in a row, and make sure you
Mhm.
really walk down this resilient and courageous and strong. Don't forget the patience and the persistence and the perseverance to get through it. It's not easy. And I can't make it best, but I can make it better. So do what you can. And next time, I'll see you soon. Thank you.